So I just put a little something together for you guys about sort of some late season problems that I've seen in pecan orchards over the years. And then I also just put together a few questions that I get asked a lot when I do pecan visits. Whenever I go out on a pecan call, generally every orchard I visit, I will see pecan scab. Always ask about their fungicide routine. Pecan scab is pretty easy to diagnose. It's little black lesions on the leaves and the nuts. In Arkansas, we need 6 to 12 sprays needed per year. And, a grower can have a pretty decent pecan crop without pecan scab in a dry year. Like 2012. 2012, we didn't have much rainfall and pecan scab was really light. And I've heard that year brought up numerous times. Well, I didn't spray and I had a crop. Always try to remind folks that when we have wet years, the pressure is very, very high for pecan scab. I would say it's our number one issue affecting pecan quality in our state. So usually that's an answer to one of the questions. So always keep pecan scab in your mind. I get a lot of questions about poor kernel fill. And you heard Chris mention poor kernel fill. Most of the time when I see it, there's an issue with pecan scab or water stress. I see it a lot in orchards that are not irrigated. Kernel fill happens from August all the way up until November. And usually August is pretty dry. So, if they're not irrigating in August, September, then they're going to have poor kernel fill. Also, there could be some nutritional issues that cause poor kernel fill. Ask about what fertilizers they applied, and if they took a leaf sample. And Amanda sent out a message to all the agents, and I sent out a message to my pecan grower list about sending in tissue nutrient samples to our lab. It can only be done in July. That's just what they have to go off of to judge everything by on the nutrient analysis. So that's really important for pecans. Insect pests, insect pests are always an issue. But in general, the biggest ones for pecans that I see are stink bugs, aphids, and weevils. And aphids, are just always a problem. They can pop up early season, mid-season, late season. Our stink bugs and weevils tend to be a little more late season. And I'm going to talk more about those today. I've heard this one a lot. My production is zero. This orchard used to produce. This year it didn't. What is going on? If a grower's in that situation, or if y'all get a call about that, talk about irrigation. Irrigation is really important. Talking about off-bearing years, because pecans do produce a lot one year and then they'll produce less another year. They do this less often if they're not as stressed, which Chris had talked about that. If you fertilize, if you irrigate, you'll have a lot less of that off-bearing problem. We've had this happen in Arkansas, late freezes. Late freezes can impact pecan production. So if we get a late freeze, I always try to go out and assess in the area if there's been damage to the pecan flowers or to any of the tissue. Pecans come out late, but we have been getting really late freezes here lately. I think we had one like April 21st. And we were probably, our growth was probably a good 2 inches at that point. And we didn't get hurt too bad, but I did see some damage, freeze damage farther south. Nutrient issues, and Amanda always brings this up when she comes out on calls with me sometimes. And if you have had flooding, that completely strips that area of all nutrients. So it's very important, you know, to make sure you fertilize that next season. I've visited a lot of orchards that don't have a fertility management program, and that's something that's fairly easy to get into place. So when you guys are dealing with these types of issues, especially when production's low, suggest fertilizing. Overcrowding, you know, this is an issue in older established pecan orchards. You're supposed to have 50% sunlight on the orchard floor. So a recommendation for that would be, you know, coming in and thinning. And of course, you can have zero production if you have a heavy pecan scab year. The nuts will actually just abort if it's really heavy early on. So we talked a little bit about questions to ask, and you know, if you have a pecan call, you know, how old are the trees and have they been managed? What variety? Are they irrigated? Another one is, what equipment do you have? Because this is going to dictate what a grower can or can't do, because they may or may not have an air blast sprayer or harvest equipment. And there are sort of one-stop shops that will come in and manage orchards for folks. So some people do that, contract harvesters and sprayers. What fungicides and insecticides have been applied? What fertilizer has been applied? Has zinc been applied? And it's very important for the zinc to be applied foliarly. It's not taken up well when it's applied to the ground. Suggest sending off tissue samples for nutrient analysis. Did the orchard produce last year? That might give you some insight on whether or not they're on an off-bearing year. You know, if it produced heavily the year before and then this year they're not getting a really good crop, it could be alternate bearing situation in place. Have the trees been standing in water or flooded? This will impact the crop the following year if they have been flooded. Generally, we say it has to be about 2 weeks or more. If it's under 2 weeks, it doesn't seem to have a huge impact on the yield that I've seen from the data, but 30 days and they're pretty stressed. Once again, that's going to strip out all those nutrients. So it's going to be really important to have a good fertility management program in place to account for that in the next year. So pecan insect pests, we've talked about this, and they can affect the pecans all the way up through November. Right now, we're probably at about half shell hardening. It's going to be different, you know, in different locations and for different varieties, moving into dough stage. So our mid to late season pest, fall webworm. Fall webworm, I see it every year. Some years it's a lot worse than others. I don't know how bad this year is going to be. In general, we say don't worry about this if the trees are larger. If the trees are small, especially becoming established, I do worry about this more because they're pretty much consuming all of the foliage that tree has. And it really needs to be storing carbohydrates during this time period. So my rule of thumb is if you have about 25% of the foliage being eaten, or you see about 25% of that foliage covered in webworm, just spray. Webworms are really difficult to control though, because they're within that web. So you have to get them when they're in like first, second instar. If there's just a few, you know, you can cut out that limb and just burn it and destroy it to help prevent, you know, the spread. So that's a really good management practice if there's just a few in a small orchard. And we just use a Caterpillar product. I mean, you can use Intrepid, Confirm, BT, which that's methoxyphenazide, the Intrepid and Confirm, or you can use a general pyrethroid. Another thing you'll notice is a summer pecan drop, and I've seen it. We're kind of at the tail end of it. And whenever I see it happen, I'll pick up a pecan and look to see if I see any hickory shuckworm eggs. And that's what this is, a hickory shuckworm egg, late season pest. Here's a picture of the adult. Here's the larvae. And they burrow underneath and feed on the shuck inside. And I'll see these ribs turn really black. And if you just take a knife or something and cut the area, you'll see the pupae or the larva. Now, sometimes this can be mistaken for pecan scab because it causes the shucks to become black. So, you know, always just take your knife and cut into those shucks and see if there's anything under there, because you might have a hickory shuckworm infestation.
Hey, Jackie.
Yeah.
Hey, about that hickory shuckworm, you know, we've got our pecan demos, 2 different ones. We're not, do we trap for that? How do we monitor for that? We don't have any traps for that. And is that something we need to do, or?
Yeah, Sherry. So there are traps for that. So you can monitor for them. And I suggest starting to monitor for them. I would start probably in June, late June. They'll start, their first flight is usually in July. I'll be honest, most growers that spray, they're going to pick up this control spraying for stink bug and pecan weevil.
Well, right now we've been trapping for stink bug and weevil and pecan nut case bear, and our numbers have been so low, there's been no need to spray in either orchard. So 3 of us are on this webinar. When you say monitor, what are we looking for? I mean, are we looking for?
It's a wing trap, just like your case bear trap. So you would just put it up, and it has a pheromone. So you just look and see if you got shuckworm. Now it's more for timing. It's that we don't have like a threshold. So I believe the degree day model for hickory shuckworm is once you catch one, it's about 300 degree days before you spray and expect egg lay.
All right. Well, we'll just have to get those traps for next year.
Yeah, I think that would be a good addition to y'all's project.
Okay.
And Sherry, I'm thinking about submitting a proposal to do some work on hickory shuckworm, because not a lot of work has been done on it. And I would be interested if y'all find it.
Okay.
Because I have seen it. I think I've seen an increase in orchards over the time I've been here of hickory shuckworm. So y'all just let me know if y'all see it increasing out there. Here's a picture of the damage. Right down that rib line of the nut. If you cut into there, you'll find the larvae. And they pupate. So these will fall on the ground and they'll pupate and come out on old shucks that overwinter. Also, there's about 3 generations a year. So that's one reason why it's important to run a rake through an orchard at the end of the year and burn everything. That really helps with hickory shuckworm management, getting out all the debris. Right there's the pupa. So we talked about gathering and destroying the drop nuts. You can look at the aborted nuts for larvae. You can control phylloxera. You can monitor half shell hardening. This is about the same time as Weevil emergence. Use BT confirm, intrepid, pyrethroids. Generally, you want to time it at half shell hardening, or you can do 300-degree days after first trap catch, and you may need a second treatment about 7 to 10 days later to pick up any that you may have missed. Once they get into the shucks, they're pretty difficult to control, at least that generation, but you could monitor and then put a spray out for the second generation. So another issue we have with pecan quality in our state is pecan stink bug. And this is the damage you'll see on the kernels, and it affects, the quality of the nut, the taste, and makes it very unappealing to look at. And you get a very, very low price when they find pecan kernels like this in your pecans. Here's just a picture of the different types. They can feed on pecans all the way up until after shuck split. So they're an issue throughout the entire time period. I just want to mention a lot of orchards I've been out to, they're next to soybean fields and other areas. Whenever those soybean fields are sprayed or harvested from, you can have a migration of stink bugs into your pecan orchards. Another thing to look out for is host plants around the area. Just mowing around the area can help take out some of those hosts for stink bug. So you generally monitor for these guys with pyramid traps. I try to protect or try to put out the traps along all the sides and some in the middles, because I kind of want to see how it moves through the orchard. Now, Don Johnson did a study to try to establish an economic threshold for monitoring, and really he didn't get any good, clear results on if you find 5 in a trap, then you would spray. My advice is, once you see them moving into that orchard and notice that they're present, you need to keep a close eye on it and put out a spray. You can incorporate a pheromone in these traps, and some of them are just passive. And there's been a little bit of work done to say it increases the trap catch. So, keep that in mind. Do y'all use the pheromones in y'all's? Yeah.
We've got pheromones for brown stink bug and green.
And green.
Both.
Yeah.
I think that's right. Isn't that right, Keith? I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah.
That is correct.
All right. Well, good deal. Mainly synthetic pyrethroids are used to manage stink bugs. This is a big issue in some farms and not others. It can be localized, and this is pecan weevil. So if you've ever picked up a pecan and it was hollow, and you'll find a little almost perfectly round hole, and that is from the pecan weevil. This is a key pest in pecans. The adult is pretty big. It's about 3/8 of an inch long, and the female has a very long snout. And there's a picture up in the corner. You can see it beside a penny. It's a pretty big little critter. They emerge after a heavy rainfall, and it's generally around this time period. So if we get a heavy rainfall, from now until mid-September, I would expect a pecan weevil emergence. They're susceptible from the dough stage all the way up to shuck split. Now they can feed on nuts in the water stage, and sometimes they'll come out a little early, but they can't lay eggs, and these nuts will still abort. So, that's why they can be an issue as early as July. What they do is they oviposit inside of the nut. And it's really cool. If you ever see this, if you check the shucks and you see a little black hole, and there's all of this little stippling all around the hole, a bunch of little tiny wounds. What this is she sticks in her ovipositor and then rotates around and makes these marks with her mandibles while she's ovipositing. And the nuts in the gel stage are what they need to complete their development. Each one will oviposit in 15 to 30 nuts, and they'll lay 2 to 4 eggs per nut. And yeah, if you look at one, you can find 3 to 4 larvae in there, and they'll consume the entire kernel. And there's just a couple of pictures of the larvae in there. This is a beetle, so the larvae are legless. There will not be any legs on the larvae, and that's how you can distinguish it from, some of the lepidopterans like case bearer. Shuckworm will be outside on the shuck. They'll feed about 30 days. They destroy that kernel. It'll fall to the ground, and that larvae will crawl out and burrow into the ground about 4 to 12 inches deep. And they'll spend 1 to 2 years in the soil, pretty far down there. And they build a really nice little nest, a little burrow down there. And they're pretty safe from pesticides. There's been multiple studies looking at trying to do different soil drenches to get them, but nothing at this point has ever been found effective managing the pupal stage. These guys can be monitored with a circle trap, and this is just some wire mesh and with some wood laths, and then you can put a little trap top on there. It's simple to build, install, and monitor. There is a fact sheet about building these guys if you're interested. They're very compatible with haying and grazing because you staple them on the tree. One thing I do want to mention is it's very important that you have the whole circumference of that tree surrounded by a circle trap. So use multiple circle traps if one doesn't cover that tree. Because what it is the weevil, once it emerges, most of them climb up the tree. They don't fly. So you need to be able to intercept them at any point around that tree as they're walking up. And the threshold is in about 10 trees, 0.3 weevils per trap per day. Dr. Phil Mulder worked that out. He was at Oklahoma State University. There's a lot of good fact sheets on this, and you can order a lot of those parts on Great Lakes IPM. At least the little trap tops. They actually also sell the traps already put together, but it's a lot cheaper to make them yourself. Homeowners can actually manage with just circle traps. If they just have a few trees, it'll reduce their weevil population by about 80%. So they'll still have some, but if they use circle traps, it'll help a lot. And then just a reminder, pecan scab is always going to be an issue. We need to be spraying up through August.